Welcome to the Pulse Protein Micro Summit series. My name is Tanya Durr, and I will be your host for today's functionality panel. Yesterday, we heard about the marketing of Pulse benefits and the data behind the why. Today, we will talk about the how. Now, we have many innovators in the audience today, and we know that pulses conceptually make sense. They're sustainable, they offer protein, and much more. But what actually happens when we take these ingredients to the R&D lab and start experimenting? Well, today we have 4 experts that will bring over 50 years of cumulative experience to walk us through their perspectives with working with pulses. Now, before I introduce today's panelists, I have a few housekeeping items to cover. During the presentation, questions will likely emerge, and so we want you to type your message into the channel, the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Now, unfortunately, we won't have time to address these questions during the panel, but please do still submit them. We're going to be using these questions to fuel the conversation in the discussion rooms that will take place after this session. Now, similar to yesterday, you'll also be able to access the discussion rooms under today's agenda. That's June 16th, right here on the platform. We'll have our experts in the room, so be sure to come to listen, or you can even just ask your questions directly. Now, lastly, if you have any technical issues during the session, try refreshing your browser and be sure that the session player is set to play, not pause. So when in doubt, press refresh. Now, allow me to introduce the panel of experts that will talk about pulse ingredients and their applications. We have Dr. Michael Nickerson, professor at University of Saskatchewan, and he's also the research chair for the Saskatchewan Ministry of Agriculture. Yulia Borsuk, manager of end products at the Canadian International Grains Institute under the technical division of Cereals Canada. And Dr. Emanuele Zannini, senior research coordinator at the School of Food and Nutritional Sciences at the University College Cork, Ireland. Lastly, we have Dr. Shannon Hood-Niefer, VP of Innovation and Technology at the Saskatchewan Food Development Center. Please welcome our panelists for our session on pulse functionality. Now, I'm going to turn things over to our first speaker, who's Michael Nickerson, who's going to set the stage for all the presentations that will follow. So be sure to listen closely. Now, while Mike is pulling up his presentation, I'll mention that Mike has dedicated much of his career on improving the use of plant proteins. And today we're going to get that 10-minute crash course on what these ingredients are and how they function. So Mike, we see your screen, your slides, so over to you.
Perfect. Well, thank you. And thank you to Pulse Canada to inviting me for this Micro Summit series. It's really exciting to be here. And hopefully we'll have some good discussions in the discussion room. So I'm going to talk about protein functionality of pulse-based ingredients. Now, as you know, the plant-based protein market and pulse market is increasing substantially, and there's many macro drivers: population growth, changing demographics, changes in regulatory bodies. But ultimately, we want to produce a high quality product using plant-based protein. So this is a nice picture of me trying out the Beyond Meat Burger at A&W. I couldn't go all the way. I had to have bacon and cheese just to get the taste, but the quality was quite good, and I really enjoyed the burger. So when we talk about protein functionality, we really have to go back to the protein structure. And as you know, it's a string of amino acids folded together to make a larger protein. And depending on how it folds, you can have various amino acids on the surface. So they could be really charged and really like to interact with water, or they could be very hydrophobic in nature. So they want to interact with fats or lipids in your product. So depending on the surface properties and the way the protein folds, you can end up with different functionalities. So one of the areas that I work in is how can we tailor the surface properties and control the functional attributes of the proteins at the end use. We talked about the structure a little bit of the protein, but In order to elicit a lot of the functional properties, you usually require some level of protein denaturization. So there we're breaking down the coronary or tertiary structures of the protein and exposing those reactive amino acids that are buried inside to the surface. And we can do this through a number of means, whether it's temperature, pressure, shear, extrusion, which Shannon will talk about a little bit later, infrared heating, roasting, and so on. So there's a number of different processes that can be used to alter the structure and the surface properties of the protein to elicit new functional attributes that we can control in product formulations. So when we talk about protein functionality, we're talking about solubility, viscosity, emulsifying, foaming, water and oil holding, and gelation. So when we start modifying the structure of that protein, we can elicit a positive, neutral, or negative effect on the protein functionality. So it's really important to understand the conditions in which the protein is in, your process in which you're making your product, and then the final product chemistry that you're having. And that all can impact the functional properties of your protein ingredients. This is just it's a little busy table of the functional properties of legume flour. So I included soybean in there as a comparison. And just to go through this really quick, when we looked at the oil holding capacity, the pulses, with the exception of chickpea, had very similar oil holding capacities to soya. When we looked at the water hydration capacities, green pea had similar properties of soybean, whereas the rest had a little bit less ability to bind water. Whereas the foaming and emulsifying properties were very similar to soya. So the pulses can compete. And when we start talking about modifications of the pulses a little bit later, we can see how they can outcompete soya in some instances in terms of the functional attributes. But the flours is one thing. A lot of the work we want to talk about the value-added processing of pulses into whether it's a dry concentrate or through the wet extraction process to make protein isolates. This is just a quick schematic of how you prepare a protein isolate. So you take your pulse flour and you do alkaline extraction, and that basically solubilizes all the proteins that you want. And the insoluble component can be centrifuged out. So this is a starch and fiber and insoluble proteins. And you're left with this soluble protein solution, which you can go for further functionality or fractionation to get different functionalities, or you can use ultrafiltration or isoelectric precipitation and centrifugation to concentrate these soluble proteins. Wash them, pasteurize them, and spray dry them to yield your pulse protein isolate. Now, depending on the company that you buy this from, it could be around 80% protein. In the lab, we can get slightly higher, 85% or 90% protein in the isolate form. This is just a comparison of the functionality of protein isolates. And one thing that I like to point out is lentil and faba bean. We always talk about pea, but lentil and faba bean have some really unique functionality. The solubility, for instance, is quite a bit higher than pea and chickpea. Remember, chickpea has the extra lipid that's based in that. Now, when we look at the water hydration capacity, chickpea and lentil perform better than pea and faba bean. Oil holding capacity, lentil had better oil holding capacity, whereas the foaming and stability were very similar amongst the pulses. Chickpea had a little bit less foaming, and that was because of the higher amount of lipid in the product. So the functionality of these protein isolates are really important to understand when we start talking about product development. Now, there are a number of different factors that affect protein functionality in your system and your process. Intrinsic factors, so this is properties of the protein itself, stemming from its conformation and amino acid profiles. Extrinsic factors, which are easily controlled, so this is your pH, your salt, your temperature, other ingredients in your system. So this is your product formulation. And then you have processing factors where you can modify the ingredient yourself, or in your food processing manufacturing, you can alter the properties of the ingredients. So we can use these factors to start tailoring the functional properties of these ingredients for certain applications. This is just an example of solvent effects. So at pHs away from the isoelectric point or low salts, this is where the proteins have really highly charged. So there's lots of protein repulsion going on. And we see an increase in solubility, increase in protein hydration and water binding, improved emulsification. We can control how aggregates are formed, so we can control the gelation properties. And we tend to have reduced foaming. So having high solubility is really important for beverage applications, for instance. When we talk about pHs near the isoelectric point or high salt, we have a lot less repulsion going on, so there's more protein aggregation and attraction happening. Here we have reduced solubility, poor water binding, poor emulsification, controlled gelation. So again, we can control how it aggregates to form different gel products like yogurt or cheese. And we have improved foaming. So depending on the solvent conditions, we can really alter the functional attributes of the protein ingredients. There's also effects of organic solvents. So ethanol, for instance, can impact the protein structure. Ethanol is used quite a bit in terms of extracting flavor profiles in pulse-based ingredients. So we can look at how that impacts functionality as well. We're also interested in how other ingredients in your food system interact. So here we have a picture of polysaccharides interacting with an oil-water interface in an emulsion system. So it can cause phase separation. It can lead to the development of different interfaces, which then can be used to control the release of bioactive compounds if they're dissolved in the oil phase. So there's a lot of opportunities when we're talking about interactions of polysaccharides and controlling their functional attributes of the proteins. Another big area of interest is the addition of other proteins. So as you know, pulses are deficient in the sulfur amino acids and tryptophan, but rich in lysine, whereas the cereal proteins are deficient and rich in the opposite. So using co-processing or blending of pulse and cereal-based protein ingredients can really improve the protein quality. So the PD-Cas scores or the essential amino acid profiles in those products, but also give unique functionality that's different from, say, the pulse ingredient alone. When we talk about processing, as I mentioned earlier, we're talking about unraveling the protein structure and changing its surface properties. This can have not only effect on functional properties, but also on that protein quality. So it has a tendency to increase that digestibility to improve those PD-Cas scores for the protein quality aspects. And this plays a big part in product development. There's a number of different processing techniques, and this is just a sample of thermal, physical, biological treatments. There are others. Here are the main ones, but the idea is that we want to modify the protein structure to elicit some change in the surface properties of the protein ingredients. This is just a table of some applications and things to consider. So solubility, pH, and salt are big factors. High solubility is important for beverages, whereas low solubility is better for meat analogs. Oil holding capacity is really important for meat analogs, and so on. Gelation, pH, salt, protein aggregation, temperature, fixatives, these are all important considerations when talking about adjusting or tailoring the functional attributes to a protein application. So that concludes my presentation. I hope I was close to the 10-minute mark. I'd like to thank the provincial government for supporting my chair, the university, and there's my webpage in case you want some more information about my research program. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Mike, for your presentation. You've demonstrated not only the wide range of pulse ingredients available, but you also showed the different formats like the whole flours, protein concentrates, and the isolates. So our next speaker will actually put what we just learned about functionality into real life applications. Now, so Yulia is our next speaker. So she's up and she's going to get her slides up. But Yulia is an expert baker from Sigi. And while her career has been focused primarily on wheat, she has actually spent more time baking with pulses than with just wheat flour. So Yulia brings a lot of experience in the bakery industry. So we can see your slides now, and you can put it into presentation modes. And I'll pass it over to you, Yulia.
Thank you very much, Tanya. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to express my thanks to Tanya Deere and Pulse Canada for inviting me to talk about my baking experience with Pulse flours. And my presentation is a summary. Over the last almost 10 years, I've done probably more baking with pulses rather than just regular wheat flour, because we've done at Sigi, which is Cereals Canada now, lots of applied research projects using multiple pulse flours in a wide range of baked end products. So, and in my presentation, I'm going to focus on practical aspects of baking with pulse flours, challenges, and overcoming those challenges. So, first of all, the current trend in the food industry is health and nutrition, and consumers are searching for better products which offer more nutritional benefits. So pulses are excellent fit. They offer lots of health and nutritional benefits, and pulse ingredients can be used in baked end products and deliver better for you product. The marketing aspects of using pulse flours are reaching nutritional claims, other labels. If pea or other protein concentrate or isolate is used in baked end product, the marketing can be done as using plant-based protein ingredients, which is again very popular trend in the food industry right now, or using sustainable ingredients in your product. So overall, pulses are offering great opportunities to the baking industry. So right now, pulse processing manufacturers offer a wide range of pulse ingredients. Flours milled from the whole seeds, dehulled or decorticated, untreated, treated, but also other interesting ingredients are available on the market, such as chips, grits, cracked seeds, and so on. So the concept of using those ingredients would be creating a bread from a mixed grain. In this case, pulses will be used as a blend of those chips or grits. Very interesting concept. So in the rest of my presentation, I'm going to talk about pulse flours, specifically in baking for nutritional fortification, and the level of incorporation of pulse flours is quite high. Typically, pulse flours are blended with wheat flour. It can be white flour or whole wheat flour. And level is high, 15% or up to reach the nutritional claim. So first, what we need to understand that pulses are excellent in nutrition, but they don't have any functionality, specifically gluten functionality in baking, which is very important. It creates the structure in the dough. So when we introduce a new ingredient which doesn't have that functionality, it interferes with the gluten development in the dough system. So we have sticky doughs, very extensible doughs, and overall dough structure is weak. It's a challenge to retain carbon dioxide, which is produced during fermentation. So, and Definitely pulse flours impact bread quality as well. So here we have two loaves. One is just regular white pan bread on the left side, and on the right side we have pulse containing flour bread, which is yellow pea in this case at 20% inclusion. So the difference is quite obvious. We see there is a darker overall appearance of the loaf, smaller loaf volume. If we look at slices of bread, again, color is quite different. It can be yellow, creamy, grayish. It all depends on the type of pulse flour which is used. So softness is reduced as well. And of course, breads with pulse flours have a distinct aroma and flavor, which is a part of the pulse crop itself. So what we can do to overcome those challenges and produce bread of good and acceptable quality. So first of all, I would recommend to use flour, which has high protein content and strong functionality. So reduce water amount in the dough to overcome that excessive stickiness. And there are multiple ingredients available to assist with the development of gluten matrix in the dough. So wheat gluten is a simple ingredient to use, and it does improve significantly processing and bread quality. So again, here we can see two loaves baked with 20% yellow pea flour inclusion. One on the left side has only 2% gluten, and the other one on the right side has 4% gluten. So the difference, the improvement is very noticeable and significant. So, and to overcome flavor challenges, some ingredients assist. For example, molasses, honey help to mask pulse flavors in the product. So we can do a few things on the processing side as well. And again, this is all I learned through my experience baking with pulse flours. Simple solution. So there is a different hydration of pulse flours. So I would recommend to extend the dough mixing on a slow speed to get that very good and uniform hydration of flour first before we enter the gluten development stage in the dough. So watch out very precisely dough mixing time because it's very easy to overmix the dough and destroy that structure, which is very important. Keep dough temperature on the low side to prevent excessive stickiness. Bake at lower temperatures for a little bit longer time to prevent excessive darkening of the loaf, and use the right baking process. So if we are talking about high volume pan bread, which is a challenging product, so I would recommend using a baking process which involves short fermentation times. So here we see different loaves which were baked with pulse flours, and surprisingly, all pulse flours behave very differently in bread making. So we have wheat control, and we have split yellow peas, decorticated red lentils, whole yellow peas, whole navy beans, and chickpea flour. So what we can see on this slide, that split yellow peas produce the smallest loaf with the most compact and dense crumb structure. And chickpea flour produced very nice loaf, which is similar in size to wheat control and overall good crumb structure. But I have to mention that internal properties are changed as well. So we have more coarse and open crumb structure when we use pulse flours. So pulses can be used, again, I'm talking about flours in different end applications. If we are talking about yeast leavened products, high volume pan bread, 15% of gluten, excellent bread quality, faba beans, navy beans. I would recommend to work with the whole wheat flours or blend of whole wheat and white flour and add some pulse flours on top, because it's a good application. That taste is not that much impacted. And even artisanal baking is a good application for pulse flours. And some ethnic breads, like you see in the middle of this slide, this is a Moroccan round bread, very successful product with 20% inclusion of chickpea flour. So pulse flours can be used in other products such as flatbreads, tortillas, pitas, and also in sweet goods like cupcakes or cookies. Overall, there are many end product applications where pulse flours can be utilized. So overcoming pulse flavor is a challenge. Again, different pulse flours vary in the flavor profile and intensity. So whole pulse flours tend to have a little bit stronger flavor compared to flours milled from dehulled seeds. Interesting approach that different cultivars or varieties within the same pulse crop have a different profile in terms of flavor, and I'm going to talk a little bit more in our discussion room about that. So pre-treatments on seeds and flowers exist, and they are quite successful in eliminating that flavor. And of course, ingredients which help masking pulse flavors in the products. So what to consider when baking with pulse ingredients? Again, this product is designed for a niche market. Again, different pulse flours behave differently during processing. It's important to keep in mind. So blending of different pulse flours or pulse ingredients is a practice to use. It allows to maximize the benefits. And the percent of pulse flour inclusion depends on the type of baked products. So limitations on processing and bread quality can be optimized. And it's important to keep in mind that consumers have different preferences for flavor profiles, and they have different level of acceptance. So that's important to keep in mind as well. So, and to conclude, I would say that baking with pulse ingredients is a trend which will stay. There is a demand from consumers and there is an interest from manufacturers. And overall, it's a great ingredient to use in baking. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Yulia, for your presentation. You really demonstrated the opportunity for pulse flours in breads and other baked goods and all the considerations to optimize quality. So we will now turn our attention to beverages, and we want to see how pulses are finding their way into this category. So our next speaker is actually based in Ireland, Emanuele Zannini from the University College Cork, who will talk about pulses in beverage applications. And I see your presentation right now, Emanuele, so you can begin. Begin speaking.
Thank you very much, Tanya, and good afternoon, everybody. I would like to thank Pulses Canada for the nice invitation. And for the next 10 minutes, I'm going to guide you to the latest, let's say, knowledge development, that basically how we're researching and our European consortiums actually are achieving on this specific topic. As you know, the meaning of food change over time, moving from being just consumed as a way, as a tool for delivering nutrition, and towards, something that basically is providing much more than that. So consumers are much looking for health attributes or for as a tool to protect against some disease, until nowadays where basically food is being seen as a way to treat specific medical conditions. So, and this means also that the food technology has been changed dramatically to, let's say, accommodate these new needs that consumers is actually looking for nowadays. Of course, when we talk about food, it's quite clear that the way we are producing, processing, purchasing, consuming, and dispose our food, it has to change. Considering the fact that basically the overexploitation and rising consumption means that by 2015, we need 3 planets worth of natural resource if we want to keep the business as usual. So definitely it's time to change and change dramatically. Why? As you can see here in these slides, you see the CO2 concentration is rising, temperature climbing, the wildfield is suffering. At the same time, we can see the population is growing, and heaven has more people than ever before are overweight. So there is something that doesn't work here. So we need to rethink the way we are, let's say, interacting with our food system. Definitely, as we learn from Michael and Julian, definitely protein, the investigation of alternative proteins is a hot topic. In particular, in Europe, the EU Commission is investing so much money in research, innovation, and innovation actions to deliver alternative options and also filling knowledge gaps that basically will allow food industries to, let's say, embrace this protein transition. Definitely, what the trends that basically are going to shape the plant-based foods and also the science of food is the texture and taste. You know exactly what I'm talking about here, because consumers you can tell them so different stories to engage them, to change the habits. But definitely, the food has to taste good and has to be delicious. Of course, also added value in terms of health is also something that basically consumers are always looking for. A clean approach, so basically making sure that the ingredients that you're going to use are basically as less as possible and clean. Of course, the protein content, but also the quality of the protein is very important. And of course, the last but not least, the environmental concern and animal welfare. All these aspects are going to shape the food industry approach, and also with that, the science behind. Definitely here, they said several food categories that basically are mainly targeted from the food industry. And for each of them, the aspect of natural taste, texture, appearance, and affordability is a top priority. And importantly, the last one, affordability. Because if we want to make a change, we need to interact with the mass market, where basically they are much more driven in their choice by the price of the cost of the food on the shelf. Well, here, after just a brief introduction, I want to go a little bit deep in details on the plant-based substitute. And as you know, many consumers, citizens nowadays across the world are choosing not to embrace plant-based alternative beverages for medical reasons, lifestyle choice, and environment, and basically also, and these actually are pushing the market. Definitely, before checking how we can actually improve the quality of these products, we had the chance to look what is on the market and see basically which are the need that this product has in terms of quality and technical functionality. So what we did, we checked basically the protein content. Most of the times these products has been sold as healthier options and also enriching protein. But then you see that most of them are very low in protein. Beside the soy, where basically you can see that the protein content is almost comparable or even sometimes higher than the bovine one. So this is something that basically has to be considered when you are going to reformulate your products. And also you see basically the separation rate. So that poor suspension, most of them were actually characterized with a poor suspension stability without stabilizer, and only soy-based products were actually showing good results. Same results you can see here on some of the carbohydrates. You see being particularly rice was particularly high in carbohydrates, in particular glucose, along with coconut. And what we did the predictive GI. So we did in vitro system model, and then you see basically here how coconut and rice and brown rice plant-based dairy alternatives were particularly high in the GI. So at the end, you see that basically most of the products on the market were actually characterized with high GI, the low protein content, low suspension stability, and low mineral and vitamin content. So definitely there is huge room of improvement for actually delivering products that basically can actually compete nutritionally wise with our animal-based counterpart. So, and then as Michael was pointed out before, there are several applications that can be used for basically improving the techno-functional and nutritional property through proper ingredient selection or through a specific process, in particular enzyme and fermentation. We're gonna see a few of them. So here I want to just show you a few examples of what how the approach has been taken in our research team to improve some of the critical aspects of the plant-based dairy alternatives. Particularly here you can see we were working on quinoa. So we use as quinoa as a base, a quinoa flour in this case. And what we did, we basically use enzyme approach to break down the starch to maltose and glucose, and then convert the glucose in fructose. Why this? Because then we ferment the plant-based beverages here with the lactic acid bacteria able to convert fructose in mannitol, not considered as one of sweeteners. And that's what we did, what we achieved here. We were able to reduce the glucose content by 40% and the glycemic reduction by 36%. At the same time, we just reduced only the sweetness by 24%. So this could be an interesting and elegant approach, how we can actually overcome some of the challenges, we are facing. And this was actually related to the carbohydrate substrate. On the protein, basically, well, here we were actually applying different proteases for improving the solubility of these particular proteins, but also to, let's say, modulate the flavor. And some of the bitterness coming from the substrates in particular are related to a bitter peptide. So also specific enzymes actually can be used. We will use, for example, the one from Novozyme, Flavorzyme, that basically were actually able to really shave the flavor and improve it substantially, not the end product's quality. Of course, this was an approach where the full say flour was used. Another approach can be not the one that I'm presenting here, so where you are using isolates and concentrate and developing the products. In this particular case, we were focusing on lentils. Lentils is a very interesting alternative protein source. Also because it's depending on which type of technology is being used for extracting the protein and concentrating the protein, we can actually get a very good protein digestibility. This is something very important to take in consideration when you are basically developing a proper formulation. At the same time, when you are basically extracting and concentrating the protein, you are able to remove some of the, let's say, I will not say anti-nutrients, but some of the compounds, particularly the food maps, that basically are being considered responsible for triggering the IBS. Sorry, oops. But at the same time, you can see that also the anti-nutrients like trypsin inhibitors were actually significantly reduced, by a proper extraction process of the lentils. And what we did here as well, we were able to, again here, to reduce significantly the amount of the food maps compounds that basically were present in the food map, in the faba bean. So same approach has been used on the lentil and was applied for the faba bean. And again here also the anti-nutrient was significantly reduced. the glycine and convisin content was actually, reduced by 80%. So this is also another interesting approach when basically we are using pure ingredient rather than a full flour. Definitely here also, we were actually investigating the suitability of lentil protein to develop a plant-based model infant food formula. And basically we saw that, as again here, the protein digestibility was quite interesting. But also, as you see, the small particle size that basically were characterizing our lentil protein isolates was actually much better or smaller compared to the rice-based formula or the soy-based formula. And these actually were significantly influencing in a positive way the wettability and the suspensibility of the products when it was reconstituted with water. So definitely here we have a good background, a good start, a good say a base where we can actually build interesting knowledge and to support definitely this protein transition that actually is urgently needed. And here you can see that there is different flashpoints, real versus fake is always a dilemma. And in particular, I have to say that this is really true in Ireland, where a country based on dairy and meat. So, and you can see how challenging it could be to deliver such innovation in this country. But definitely there is so much to do, and in particular, there is so much to discover. I'd like to thank all my colleagues and all our financial support, and of course, all of you for your nice attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emanuele. What a fascinating presentation. Formulating with pulses and the proteins is truly a balancing act, which you really showed there. You want to pack in the nutrients, you want to feature the sustainability, and of course, taste is king. You can't forget about that. But it has to work functionally. So thanks for sharing that, your work on the beverage. We are going to turn it over to a different application. Our last speaker is Shannon Hood-Niefer, who will talk about meat alternatives and the intricacies of making meat-like products in the midst of this surging demand. So we can see your slide, Shannon, so the stage is yours.
Excellent, and you can hear me just fine?
We can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Shannon Hood-Niefer, Vice President of Innovation at the Saskatchewan Food Centre here. And we've been extruding plant-based proteins for quite some time now, and so long since before it was cool. So hopefully we can share with you some of our experiences and learnings. But first, I'm going to start off with what exactly are we talking about, and I'm going to focus specifically on meat analogs and high moisture meat extrusion. This is a vegan ginger beef, and it is delicious. I put it on this particular slide because it's my favorite thing that we make. But we've done everything from vegan bacon, calamari, more whole roasts and things like that, in addition to continuing to work on more whole muscle meats. But this one is delicious. So while the fuss, and actually, you know what, I need to, okay, because I actually couldn't see all my slides. Okay, so the plant-based sector is growing. We have higher than 10% annual compound annual growth rate until 2027. We are aware that consumers are paying more attention to the impact of diet and nutrition on their own health and wellness, and the consumers' desire to be more environmentally sustainable. And so these are the market pulls for the plant-based sector. And when we're discussing meat analogs, there's a bunch of different things that we can actually talk about. We can talk about tempeh and tofu and seitan, and just a veggie burger with real vegetables in it. And all of these could be considered meat analogs, and all of these actually are really quite delicious, and I encourage you to try them. But this isn't what we're quite talking about today. So we're talking about using extrusion to fibrate plant-based proteins. And luckily for us, that pulse proteins can be one of the ingredients that are used in this type of product. So I have a couple of older pictures. The picture with the blue glove in it is an extrudate. And so an extrudate is what we would call the material that comes out of the end of the extruder. And you can see the smaller fibers there. And we can make a wide variety of different structures and textures of fibration. And some of that is dependent on formulation, protein source, and extrusion operating conditions, which we'll talk about over the course of the next little bit here and in the discussion section. We can change color, length of fibration, thickness of fibration, and so on and so forth. So this is just a picture of some of the things that we can do. So as I said, doing it since before it was cool. So how do we make it? And we are looking at, so what are the ingredients that we can use? And your common suspects are here. So wheat and soy are probably the easiest ones to work with. They are also the most common ones currently, but we're also seeing a significant uptick in pea protein products in high moisture meat analogs. But we've also looked at corn, canola, oat, chickpea, flax, mustard, protein from pumpkin seeds, hemp, potato, rice, sacha inchi, algae, cricket, and mealworms, just to name a few. But the pulse proteins and using pulse ingredients is a significant portion of the product development that we've been doing lately. In this particular sector, if your goal is to mimic real meat as closely as you possibly can, and so there is a market sector for that. So obviously there's a market sector where we want it to not look and taste and feel like real meat, and that's also great. But we're focusing on what would mimic more closely to real meat. So there's a number of challenges to do that. Color is one. Just as an example, we've tested some ingredients. We tested a new and emerging pea protein, and where the ingredients company was in development, and when we extruded it, it came out bright orange. And I can't imagine real meat looking that shade of orange. And so back to the drawing board a little bit and some tweaking to that. But you know, some of these products do need some color adjustments to make sure that we're hitting the color targets or what the consumers would accept as proper coloring. Texture is probably the biggest challenge that we are looking to field. And so meat has a specific texture that we're looking for. And actually that is quite the moving target, because whether you're eating beef, pork, chicken, different seafoods, you know, how you cook it, the doneness of the meat product, and the timing of your consumption of it do play a role in the texture of that meat product. And so it's a big thing for extrusion to try and mimic, and that's why there's other technologies being used here too. But texture, we don't want it to be gritty, we don't want it to be gummy or chewy, and all of this plays a role in formulation and extrusion operating conditions, which leads to degree of fibration. Binding between protein strands will play a role in that texture or the bite. There's also some functionality challenges that we need to deal with. Plant-based proteins are not meat proteins, and they don't function in the same way. And there's differences between plant-based proteins in their functionality and their suitability for this particular application. And as the previous speakers all alluded to, and Mike specifically spoke to it, you know, that processing of that plant-based protein, especially on the plant-based protein isolates, do play a role in functionality. And this is how partly ingredient companies tweak the proteins to suit different functionalities or different applications. And so we need to find the right protein for this particular application. And so that can be a bit tricky, but we're getting better at it. The whole industry is getting better at it as we do this more and more. Consistency of those ingredients can be a challenge, especially in an emerging market, which, you know, the ingredient market for pulses is still emerging, it's still developing, and, you know, a lot variation is becoming more and more controlled. So these are things that make it easier for product development and finished goods manufacturers to make a consistent product over time. Another challenge is flavor, because plants taste like plants, and sometimes they can be bitter. And so which meat tastes like meat. And obviously there's a wide range of things there. We, as Yulia mentioned earlier in her presentation, that sometimes we're using flavor blockers or masking agents, and so we do that here in extrusion as well to block different flavor components that are interrupting any flavors that we may be adding or particularly looking for as we go through the product development process. But challenges can be overcome. So here's just an example of some of the things that we've done. We have a pulled pork, barbecue pork ribs, and sorry, I put the ginger beef in twice because I like it so much. This is a beef empanada and sausage, pepperoni stick sausage. This particular technology is actually really quite challenging because normally when you make a meat sausage, you're making a meat emulsion and you're putting that meat emulsion through a final cook step. That meat emulsion, when it's going into the smokehouse, is in its native state, and then as you cook it, you denature those proteins, and that denatured protein sets a gel, which sets your structure, which sets your bite. And in this particular case, when we're making sausages and pepperoni sticks and that sort of thing, the product, the extrudate is already denatured, and so what we are trying to do is essentially trying to build a matrix out of something that's already cooked. And so that can be quite challenging to get the right bite and the right texture. So how we do all of these things. And so this obviously is a very high level overview of process control that we use for trying to dial in the finished product quality. And all of these are levers that you can pull and different, each one has the length of the lever, I guess, in this particular case, varies depending on the product. So raw materials are significant. So in this particular case, protein and starch type do play a role. We do put a bit of starch, fat, and fiber in our formulation. Otherwise, we would probably make the most expensive alternative meat product ever. Water content play a significant role. So there will be a formulation balance to get the right flavor and the texture and the mouthfeel that you're particularly looking for out of the raw material. There are some limitations with extrusion in terms of how high we can get the lipid content up. And then while we're extruding, some of the things that we can manipulate are, well, not while, I guess in the setup, in what we would call extrusion tooling, die design, and screw profile are something that we would decide in advance. And then while we're extruding, we can make adjustments to screw profile, throughput, temperature throughout the extrusion. And all of these things impact melt temperature, pressure inside the extruder, residence time, and your mechanical energy or your shear. And all of these things impact all of the different parameters that we could look for in a finished product, which could be texture, the ability of fibration or texturization, any water holding capacity or water holding properties that we need to see. Nutritional properties, shelf life, color, shape, and flavor are all impacted by all of these particular inputs. So formulating for success, it's more than just protein selection. We're seeing more and more blends with proteins just from a nutritional point of view, so that we can balance out and make sure that our amino acids are complementary. And that we need to also keep in mind any post-extrusion processing, because I can tell you that all of those delicious pictures that I had up earlier is not what it looks like when it comes out of the extruder. And so we need to do some post-extrusion processing. And so if we're grinding it, shredding it, cutting it, or battering it and deep frying, all of these things will play a role in terms of the structure that needs to come out of the extruder, so that we can actually still have some product that looks feels and tastes like what we need it to after we've gone through all these other steps. So we have over 300 pieces of food processing equipment, and actually 3 of them are co-rotating twin screw extruders. And I will leave it there. I look forward to fielding your questions later.
This is fantastic. Thank you so much, Shannon, for presenting on meat alternatives and extrusion process. So we've learned a lot from the 4 speakers. We really packed it in. These are truly the experts in their fields, and we were able to get through all of that. But we're going to, I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. We're going to have an opportunity to go and hop into the discussion rooms where we can actually dive a lot deeper into each of these different topics. But I just wanted to recap. I mean, we heard a lot about the ingredients and their functionalities. We saw all the different considerations for optimizing these ingredients in 3 very different applications: the bakery, beverage and milk alternatives, extruded meats. We saw actually that there's not just one pulse that fits all applications, which actually might appear really confusing initially, but I think this is what makes it so fascinating to be working with pulses. So with that, I hope that all of you will be able to join us in the discussion rooms. I want to thank all of our panelists for sharing their expertise with us today. And thank you to all our participants for joining. Now, our discussion rooms, again, can be accessed through the main platform on the at the top of the screen. You can just hit that link there. But you'll definitely also want to check out a lot of the pulse ingredient suppliers that are on display today on this platform. And of course, you want to comfortably chat and book meetings with other attendees. And I will mention that this platform will be available for the remainder of the week. So be sure to come back to connect. And so with that, we'll formally close the panel session and open up the discussion rooms. And so we'll see you there. Thank you.